started here. Can everybody hear me? Everybody hear me? I can't talk without this. Thank you everybody for being here tonight. We appreciate your investment of time. We know that all of you are very, very interested in this topic. And so thank you for taking a little bit of time tonight. I'm Mayor Ron Anders, and I just wanted to make some opening comments before we get started and kind of talk about how we're going to structure the evening. Okay? Can you not hear? It's not going to work? It's not working. I'll talk loud. I'm not yelling at you, I promise. Okay? The genesis of this is simply this. After the election, I felt like listening during the election that this was a topic that was important to this community. That there was some debate on, there was some contracting opinions about, and it was important for this city to have a philosophy. Because right at that point in time, we really didn't have one. We had kind of a nuisance-based policy that when there was something going on that was either loud or inappropriate, the police would go to there and identify it and try to quell it. But the city in and of itself had zero policy as to how we were going to handle short-term rentals. And this is not going away. It's a part of our modern culture. So it was my initiative, simply, to create a task force to try to figure out a path that Auburn could take to have a philosophy going forward. Okay? What I did is I pretty much called Brett and Bob up and I said, would you like to serve on this task force? There was not any more science to it than that. We had 4 different task forces, you might remember, and the council was all divided up to do different things. And so we started this task force. We had a policy, we had a ordinance that was drafted. We put that out there for you to comment on. We had a public hearing about that ordinance. I would call that a very restrictive ordinance. And then we drafted another ordinance. We allowed you to comment on that. I would call that a more permissive ordinance. I think it's important for you to realize right now those are drafts. Those are drafts. Those are not laws. So here we are tonight with the second public hearing. So we've had over 60 days of commentary that you've been able to utilize on the web. This will be our second public hearing. We've had 2 different drafts. This task force has had a couple of meetings. We've added some more members that we'll introduce you to in a minute. And we'll eventually take all the information that we've gleaned from listening to you, that we've read from your comments, that we've all heard personally and individually from people who have contacted us, and we'll get together and we'll start trying to put together some ideas and some bullet points that we'll hand off to Planning Commission. What ultimately will happen is that Planning Commission will work on drafting an ordinance that they will vote on, and there'll be another public hearing for that. And then that will be passed up to the City Council, who will have the final authority to make determinations. So there's still a ways to go, and there's still at least 2 more mandated public opportunities that you'll be able to speak to this based on the information that's provided you. All right? We're not in a real huge hurry, but it's important that we're efficient, because it's only fair to each of you that we have a policy in place that you understand, and then we can all move forward on it. All right? So we have a sense of urgency, but we're not going to be reckless about this. So tonight is another step in the process. We respect your time. We want your time to be valuable tonight. What you say to us is important. It's being recorded. All of us will be taking notes. So we expect you to talk. In a minute when we go around, I'll have the microphone. You'll raise your hand and I'll come up to you and allow you to make your comments. All right? We're going to ask that you keep those at 3 minutes. It's very important that you're as efficient as possible. We don't want to have to tell you that your time is up, but we will, okay? And please don't be offended by that, all right? And if you need to follow up later, you can follow up later and make some follow-up comments. But to be fair to all of you, we're going to hold you to 3 minutes, okay? All right. At this point in time, we have added some people to our task force. We'll see if the microphone works, and I just want them to introduce themselves to you, okay?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Brett Smith. I represent Ward 4.
Hi, I'm Evan Crawford with Point to This, and that's about it. What's that? I'm a father. I have 2 kids. That's most of my job. I'm a real estate agent here, so.
Thank you all for coming out. My name is Bob Parsons. I'm the ward rep for Ward 6, and I appreciate you coming out and voicing your opinions tonight.
I'm Forrest Cotton. I think I know most of you in this room. I'm the planning director and also the appointed staff liaison and the drafter of the regulations.
Stand up, we can't see that.
I'm Bob Rainbach, I'm a member of the planning commission.
I'm Marcus Marshall. I'm a member of the Planning Commission, been in Auburn for 30 years, and except going to college for a little while, and I'm glad to be here.
My name is Bruno Orich. I have both a planning background in public and private sectors and in large scale and small scale real estate development. I handed out a flyer this afternoon to you, a number of you, because recently I've gotten several phone calls that people say that I'm against short-term rentals. I'm trying to be objective about it, and I will remain objective about it.
Thank you. Great transition. Please turn your phones off. Hey, look, I know y'all are passionate about this. I ask that you conduct yourself with respect. We've tried to make a task force that represented our community. There'll be people up here that eventually won't agree with your position, but they're representative of our community. Anna Solomon is not here tonight. She's also serving on this task force, but she's out of town this week, okay? So that's who we are. It's our intent to let everybody ask a question tonight or make a comment if you want to, all right? Really, it's the purpose of this tonight is for us to hear from you. We want to know how you feel, okay? I want to clear one thing up that's been talked about. The drafts that you've seen, those aren't Forrest's drafts. That is stuff, the information that we've asked him to do, either from a leadership standpoint from the council or the staff at the city, okay? He's gotten blamed for some of this stuff. He's just simply executing information that we've asked him to put out there, all right? Okay, so what we'll do is if you'll just raise your hand, I'll bring the microphone to you. If you can speak as clearly as possible. And remember, 3 minutes. Bob, you got a clock for me? You guys got a clock? Yep. Go ahead, Rick.
I mean, I think we wanted to do a minute and a half or 2 minutes. There's a lot of folks in here.
You want to go there? 2 minutes? Well, I'm
So
sorry.
I'm just saying, if everybody wants to have a voice for 3 minutes, and one of the other things that we had talked about was the discussion tonight, is focused on the revision.
Use the mic, please.
Where's the
Tell us who
revision?
you are.
The revision was I'm sorry?
Who are you?
Brett Smith, represent Ward 4, City of Auburn. Also, partner of law from House Smith Law. But the thought was that we don't want to get into, there's going to be different philosophies, and I think you've expressed that. But the main thing is we're crowdsourcing information right now. We want to get feedback. I know there's an opportunity, there's emotions about the issue, but let's keep it directed towards the task force and your comments and criticisms on this particular ordinance. Just no crosstalk between each other, just kind of try to keep it simple. So, thank you.
Okay. All right. Who's first?
I live in a neighborhood conservation neighborhood, Cary Woods. I read both ordinances. I don't understand them. I don't know what my rights are and who can come in my neighborhood and rent something out, but we have to have you can only have 2 unrelated people living in my neighborhood. So I don't know when you rent to 6 people. And I heard various things. Can someone do a VRB on my neighborhood? I don't know. That's my question.
Could you please identify yourself?
Louisa Patterson. I live in Cary Woods. I don't work.
Forrest, can you answer that question?
Yeah, what we do know is there's a lot of this activity that's been going on, and as years have gone by, the number of rentals increases to the point where we know we need to develop some kind of framework for it. We've gotten a lot of complaints, a lot of folks that are doing this and feel like that there's not a level playing field out there, that some people are playing by the rules in terms of paying the appropriate taxes, others aren't, and that puts some people at a competitive disadvantage. And a lot of those complaints, I think, is ultimately they reached a level where it drove the city to realize this was an important issue that needed to be regulated in some form or fashion. Ron mentioned the initial draft was very conservative, and that's correct. The initial draft that I put together was largely done based on just sort of my working experience as a planning director, the experience I've had in other short-term rental communities. And it's not untypical for a planning director or a planner when when you start wading into some unknown territory or uncharted territory, I find that it's pretty prudent to be conservative, and that version was conservative. The question about the NC neighborhood, I know we're getting a lot of feedback now that the second draft does propose that it be permitted in NC in a couple of different ways and in many different areas. But the initial draft contemplated that any zone that had the family definition for occupancy purposes, it would not be allowed, period. So that is certainly an evolution of how NC has been specifically impacted from draft number 1 to draft number 2. And as Ron mentioned again, Mayor Andrews mentioned that this second version is definitely on the more permissive side, and as a draft of the ordinance, I will acknowledge that to anyone all day long. I did a lot of benchmarking, a lot of research. The current version that's being asked to be reviewed is very much so more permissive than most other places I've researched.
My name is David Martin. My wife and I have lived in Auburn for the past 45 years as faculty members. We live in a neighborhood conservation zone, and that's exactly what it means. Mr. Cotton was quoted in the village area saying this might be permitted or a quote conditional use, or quoted to the effect that the zone will be whatever the staff says it might be or will be. This is unacceptable. My wife and I have invested in 3 homes for ourselves in Auburn, one on our starter home on South Gay Street, and the next 2, including our retirement home on Wrights Mill Road. And we see this eating away in our neighborhood. And you can say, well, these people aren't in the zone or possible of this problem because they're in a neighborhood conservation zone. I hope that's correct, that the second revised ordinance is more permissive one, is not the one that's adopted by your city council. So if you live in an NC zone, you vote on your council members on whether they respect neighborhood conservation. Thank you.
This is Charles Neely. I live on Harry Avenue, also in the Neighborhood Conservation District. I live in the old part of town. That part of town is under considerable threat from this new draft. Draft calls for that area, a large area, to be moved from NC to NC overlay, and the overlay is really not NC anymore, because there are all manner of things going to be permitted in the overlay that are not permitted in the rest of town. If it's so good, let's say that everybody else had it too. So it's not a small area. I did a rough calculation based on the areas in the thing. I determined it's about almost 2 miles long and about a half mile wide. It turns out to be right at a square mile for NC 12,000 square feet in a lot. That comes out to be about 2,000 families being impacted by this. This is not any good, and it's not right. As he said before, we put our money into it, we put our time into it, we put our lives into it. I've been in the same house for 51 years. This is crazy. It's just not right. It's immoral. You should be ashamed of yourself to think about that. I think perhaps you just didn't think through it. Think through it some more. You're taking away people's rights without any real due process. It's true some people will benefit financially from this. The people who are living there won't. The last thing, we have one of those Airbnbs on our street. It's already caused one neighbor to sell out and move. It's not any good.
10 seconds.
Amen.
Sir.
10 seconds.
Hey everybody, my name is Beth Gershall and I live on Virginia Avenue. We live in a house that Miss Maudine Williams built in 1956, and we're the second people to live in it. It's a Bailey-built home, and I suspect if we ever had to sell it, his granddaughter would be happy to help us sell it. I offer all that to you to make you understand that I live in a neighborhood, and we've lived in that neighborhood for 25 years. There's an Airbnb occupying and working 3 doors down from us. It's a massive new renovation. He's skating very close to what is allowed. Thursday through Sunday, it's occupied by a myriad of people, all with giant cars, all in the road. Y'all want to try an LSU game night for fun, drunken stuff at 3 in the morning? In my neighborhood. The overlay is huge, like the gentleman before me just said. And guess what that overlay wraps around? Wrights Mill Road School. Take a look at it, y'all.
My name is Connor Bailey. I live on Brookside Drive. I used to live on Payne Street, very close to my friend and neighbor here, Charles. But we left that neighborhood because we could not get the city to enforce the Family Plus One zoning regulations. I'm very concerned that the current zoning, the current plan is to allow the planning director to determine if there are substantiated complaints without any definition of what means a substantiated complaint. And so I have real concern that if we allow these short-term rentals into neighborhood conservation zones, that we're going to be fighting not only with those property owners, but with planning commission, with the planning office, and with zoning enforcement. I fought that battle for more than a decade and finally gave up and moved away from my house in Payne Street, also a Bailey-built house, and unrelated. And so I moved to Brookside, and it's a lovely neighborhood. I want to stay there, but I don't want a bunch of Airbnb and VRBOs in my neighborhood with the parking and the parties like Beth Gertal was mentioning. Thank you.
My name is Virginia Jones, and I live off of Sherwood and in an NC zoned area. I am appreciative of how restrictive the first ordinance was, and particularly in relation to owner-occupied residences. I believe your home is your property that you reside in, and you should have some ability to define how you use it. I'm strongly against the investment, non-occupied owner residence version that's specified in the second version of the ordinance. Now, fundamentally to that, I wanted to, one, commend the task force on the effort you've made for outreach and dissemination about these changing ordinances, as well as the input opportunities. Given that, however, I'm very concerned and very dismayed by a recent survey that was constructed and disseminated by one individual and was not approved nor vetted by the full short-term rental task force or had input from the professionals in the city. That survey is highly biased. It redefines in its preface what substantiates the fundamental difference. The fundamental difference between a residence occupied and an investment version of a rental. It muddies the difference and it confuses those who are trying to give their honest opinion. I believe its intent was intentional, to muddy the waters between those differences and to shade the opportunity for the general public to honestly express their concerns and their opinions. Thirdly, I'd like to just emphasize that I think that there's some conflict of interest issues for anyone with a voting decision on these ordinances that may potentially benefit financially from the changes to these ordinances. Right. They should not be allowed to I believe it's a significant violation of ethics, and it's unfair to the majority, to all of us in the community who we expect transparency and honesty and representation of all of your constituents.
Amen. Good afternoon. My name's Louise Katainen. I live with my husband on Gay Street, and it's a NC community very close to where Beth Gertal lives and Connor and others. And I would just like to emphasize again what Virginia Jones just said about the survey. Now, this is the survey that was passed out as we came in. Anybody would think that it was a city thing. Well, it's not. It was a survey made by one person represented here, and so it's nothing that we have to fill out. I mean, if you don't want to fill it out, or if you've already filled it out, You can take it up again, but this is not a city survey. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, I want to own up real quick on the question on ethics. And the survey's optional. I believe everybody that came out handed to it, didn't. I'm the one that drafted it.
And you used it right.
Oh, let him talk, let him talk, let him
Did
talk.
not say it was optional.
How about I'm do it?
Or die.
Let him talk, let's just keep it quiet,
Yeah,
please.
let's,
Okay.
let him talk.
Here's the thing. My duty as a council member on Ward 4 is to collect data. That's what we've been doing this whole time.
In a professional manner.
All right.
We'll just continue with it. It's-
Hi, my name is Peter McMahon. I live on Chocolate Drive. I have a series of questions. If I'm allowed, I would love to hear everyone's definition, everyone on the task force, definition of the word conservation. In the proposed ordinance, you need 50% of the abutting properties to give approval for the short-term rental. Does abut also include across the street?
Yes.
I would propose an improvement, which is that the impact goes much further than across the street, probably about 2,000 feet in a circular radius. If you can get all of those people to agree, then you can go ahead. If we were to propose a new classification of district, the meatpacking district, Auburn was going to do a meatpacking district, what process would we need to put a new classification into effect? Is this the same process as that? Are we ramming this through? Are we doing this quick? I think what you're doing is creating a new district. I think you should go through all the legal requirements for creating a new district. I also question the task force as to whether 240 days is short. And lastly, we've been focusing on the negatives. My question is, what are the positives? Why do we have to do this at all? What good comes of this reclassification?
2 minutes.
And in this imperfect world we live in, the good that comes of something is often measured in money. Who's making money off this, and into whose pocket is it going?
I just want to respond about the timing. We started this task force, I think around the first of the year, maybe before the first of the year is when we got organized. It's Memorial Day. I said at the beginning, we want to be efficient, but we're not going to be reckless. I don't sense, and I believe that we're not moving at a pace that creates some expedited piece of governance that's going to be frustrating to everybody. We're trying to be very methodical about going about this.
It's the same process that you need to put in a new classification.
Forrest, how would we put in a new classification if we were,
Well, you know,
I don't know if we'd have a task force and we'd have a lot of,
No, usually, well, you never, at least historically, we've never had, historically, we've never had a task force per se deal with zoning issues. That's why you have a planning commission. So what ends up happening is we conduct land use studies, and ultimately, and if you follow the press, you'll see that there have been multiple focus area studies of great breadth that have been adopted by the council and ultimately implemented in very rapid fashion by the planning staff and council of the planning commission. So there have been numerous, I would venture to say that the number of zoning districts in the city of Auburn has more than doubled in the past decade. As we begin to be increasingly prescriptive about where zoning goes and what it allows, so that development outcomes and where uses locate is more predictable. That's how that would work. This task force process is well before the process that I'm speaking of even begins.
But Forrest is being nice and saying it's how screwed the system up, so.
Hi, I'm Larry Gerber. I'm married to Louise Kleinen, living on Southgate Street, and we've owned our home there for 35 years. And the city went through a very lengthy process to create the master plan not very long ago. And neighborhood conservation districts were quite central to that plan. And I think the current proposal basically clearly does away with the nature of the neighborhood conservation districts which were created or recognized after a very lengthy process. So I think that this is a misguided, I won't go into whatever motives there might be, but I think it's a misguided attempt to do away with the result of what had been a very lengthy and inclusive process.
I'd like to say, I'm Brad Donnelly, I live in Sherwood Drive, and I do live in a big house. Here's the deal. I agree with everything everybody said here. People who live in homeowners, with homeowners association covenants, have protection against abuses such as the boarding house style, commercial hotel operations, what we don't have. And under the current draft, which is totally watered down, is very abusive, it's a fiasco, in my opinion. I actually appreciate Forrest, a very restrictive short-term rental application. He's the expert, and I think 90% of the whole issue should be following his allowed with a little guidance from the task force and the mayor. In this particular instance, expertise, and he's spot on. And I do appreciate his expertise and his information and his due diligence on this. Now, why do we even need to go into the NC zone neighborhoods, period? The deal here is people realize that there's been a lot of developers and out-of-state and in-town developers that have a heck of a lot of money, and that's probably all great most of the time, but not all the time. As we go forward into the next couple of 10, 15 years, all of it's going to be growing. And do we really want to sell out every piece of property in this town that's left to the developers? And I call them, I'm sorry, but wealth mongers is what I call them. Leave this area alone. Everybody in here has property. We want quiet, tranquil, peaceful neighborhoods where the kids can ride bikes, skateboard, etc. And what's going to happen here is y'all have thought this, a lot of people have thought it out.
2 minutes.
Okay. There's going to be row house after row house after row house as these older neighborhoods, we're talking Ward 5, 6, a good bit of Ward 4 and 2. They're the oldest neighborhoods in this town. 1950, World War II veterans came here and built these houses, Bakerfield houses. These wards are ripe for the
2 minutes, Brad.
We got what?
2 minutes.
Oh, that is?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
thank you.
My name's Bill Caskey. I live on Sanford. My house is sandwiched between Pinedale Park and Sanford. First of all, these are hotels. Airbnb prides itself, and its investors pride themselves in their statements that it is the world's largest hotel company that has no assets. 240, well, I back up. Marriott, the one that does have assets, has just entered the fray with short-term rentals of premium properties, houses, so they're getting into the fight. They are a hotel company. So these are essentially businesses that are hotels in neighborhoods, and I think that should be prohibited. I think that once the city allows a hotel business in a neighborhood, how do you stop a hair salon, a car repair? If you can't say, well, these are okay, the ordinance, that's 20 days every month. That's a business. That's not a temporary part-time opportunity. Now, I can hold my nose and put up with 30 days rental. If somebody wants to rent a room in their house, if somebody wants to rent their house out for a football game, for a short-term rental, then okay, fine. 30 days, not 240. And NC needs to be protected. The problem that we have, the dog in this fight is the close-end neighborhoods in proximity to town and campus. Moore's Mill, East Chase, these folks out south of town, they may have an occasional rental. Look at the maps that are on VRBO or HomeAway or any of those sites. They're dotted out there. Look at the city, and they're everywhere in the NC zones in walking distance to town. We need that protection from our city council and our city government. And they failed us on the two...
2 minutes.
Okay, they failed us.
Hey, Ryan Castellan, apologize here. Little elbow drop there. Want to add a little different perspective here, change it up a little bit. We're getting, a lot of the same here against these short-term rentals. I live in the Southgate area. It's a neighborhood conservation. My first house in this area was next door to a game day house. It was owned by an out-of-town resident, and they would come and go, so it was mostly vacant. They would come in for games and various things, and I never really knew who was there, but they didn't bother me. In fact, I kind of appreciate the quiet. When it's game time, it's game time. You can hear downtown, you can hear things from my area, and I think that someone asked, what's the good of short-term rentals? Well, I have 5 people in my family. When we travel, we're looking to go to New York. We are going to have to get 3 hotel rooms in this one particular area we want to go to. It offers the opportunity for families and like grandparents, things of that nature, to all stay in one place for a more affordable price. The proximity that some people are speaking of, it relates to the university. We have an attraction here. People want to come and spend time here, be close to campus where they can park and walk. And I think that's why you're seeing it in these areas, albeit there's some traditional neighborhoods, but that is why you're seeing it. Discussion of 240 days. I have a short-term rental that's not in NC. It is in more of the student housing area. I think my last 2 to 3 guests' average age has been 72. And 2 people, sometimes they have their daughter come in. But we're not talking that everyone comes in is some hellraiser, throwing parties and all that. I think that is fear-mongering, and that's not what goes on these things.
2 minutes.
They're very high priced, the rentals are, and I think they're good for our community.
My name is Deborah Strawn. I live on Virginia Avenue, and I live next door to the house that Beth Gerthoff was talking about. I've lived on Virginia Avenue for 23 years and lived in this area for much longer than that. It has changed our lives having this house next door because, unlike what the previous gentleman said, we do have football houses in Virginia. But that's different. You know who those people are, and you know when they're coming. This is constant. This gentleman has, we've been awoken in wee hours in the morning to parties, to 9, 10 cars parked in the street, sometimes almost blocking our driveway, trash. Our neighborhood wasn't like this before. And that's not why we moved into this neighborhood. And I have an excellent idea for the solving of all of this. I think that this should be restricted to the area where all the high-rises have been built. And then they can really be in the game day, everything, all the time. They can get to downtown, they can get to campus. It's all everything. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Susan Bolt, I live on East University Drive, and I'm going to speak to your points. I do have an Airbnb, I have a 5-bedroom house. The people that come to my house don't come to my house to party. The people that come to my house come to stay as a family for weddings. They come, I've got people that come in for Thanksgiving so that they can have multi-generational people stay in the same dwelling. They're not partiers, but as a responsible host, I make sure that they are not loud. I set forth some rules about parking. They don't park in the street. My guess is that my neighbors don't even know when I'm not there and when my guests are there, because I have a certain time that they can check in. I have limitations on noise and hours, where they park. So I'm offering a place for people to come into the city of Auburn and enjoy Auburn. I have golfers that come in. I have tennis players that come in. So they're not coming to party. I do have people that come in for game day. Most of my guests, there again, are multi-generational, so that they are not there to party and be loud. I do monitor my properties with cameras, so that if it were to get out of hand, you better believe that I would be monitoring that, because as a citizen of Auburn, I have no interest in bringing somebody in to degrade my neighborhood, the city of Auburn. I'm not looking for somebody to come in and disrupt things for my neighbors. I want to be a good neighbor, but I also want to have the option to make additional income. And quite honestly, I get a lot of pleasure of sharing my house with people. And I'm talking right now, you'll get time in just a minute. But I get a lot of pleasure out of bringing people in from different states, different areas too. And then I make recommendations
2
of
minutes.
activities that they can do in the city. I sure will. So I'm all for Airbnb if you do it responsibly.
Listen, respect is really important. I know that y'all are passionate about this, and I know there's disagreement in the room, but we've got to show respect for one another. And if somebody's speaking, please don't try to speak over them, okay?
My name's Ray Askew. I live on Hurd Avenue, another one of the Jack Beatty communities. One of the interesting things about the overlay that I saw is that it runs right down the middle of my street. The opposite side of my street is in the overlay. I'm not in the overlay. Seems the question is appropriate for it to you or to somebody. What guidelines were given to you to sit down and draft something? What information, I'm not asking you to answer it right now because I want to finish this, but what guidelines were given to you and what guidelines are being used to define where this overlay is to be? It seems that if you're going to do something like this, what you do is you lay out what the guidelines are that are coming from the management or down to the management, what restrictions the management has placed on them, and then make that public as to how you're making this determination. Seems to me there's an awful lot of arbitrariness to it, but maybe it's because I'm not informed as to what guidelines were.
Forrest, why don't we get Dr. Askew some answers and get that to him tomorrow, we can publish it. But, you know, you've already got some answers to that. All right. I'm walking around, okay?
Hey, I'm in East Irwin. I also live on Hare near Dr. Neely, 2 doors down from Dr. Neely. And we have an Airbnb right across the street from our house. It's been very, very disruptive. We have 2 little boys, they're 7 and 8. They like to ride their bikes and run up and down the street and that sort of thing. And when folks come in for a weekend, they don't understand that we have little kids and family. They're not thinking about, are they looking behind them when they back out and that sort of thing. 2 weekends ago, I had a call from my neighbor who informed me that there was ultra vulgar graffiti in our street on a weekend when it was graduation weekend, when there were a whole bunch of youth across the street from the house. And I saw them. There was like a pack of 10 of them that were walking downtown in Skybar or wherever the hell they were going at 10 o'clock night. So the woman that owns the house confronted my neighbor and said, "Oh, you called the police. I didn't have, you know." And so it's not a community thing. It's not our neighborhood thing. We've got a serious problem, and we need to make sure that we are protecting these conservation areas.
Yes.
I'm Sheila Ekman, I lived in Auburn for 40 years, and I'm for the other side. I think that the whole problem, or the perceived problem that people think is going to happen, relates also to the unrelated occupancy problems we had in the past, and bad landlords. It all goes back to who the landlord is. And I do have a property that I do on VRBO in North Georgia. I've done it for 2 years. I have not had one problem. It is in the neighborhood. The worst thing that has happened is somebody took a sofa pillow from Walmart. They could have gone to Walmart and bought it. No complaints, nothing. But I monitor it. I ask questions. I ask a large deposit. You just have to be smart about how you do it. So I think it can be done, and can be done without having disruption to the neighborhood. And that said, I would like to throw out an idea to the task force. Several years ago when I was in council, I was trying to make a change that we could have alcohol served at Kiesel Park and at Jimmy Dempsey Center. Because the Kiesel Park facility just wasn't being used like for weddings because you couldn't have wine there. So they mulled it over and mulled it over, and finally decided, okay, we'll try it for a year. We'll let it happen 4 times in the first year. It was fine, and they just went ahead and passed it. Maybe we ought to have a year's trial basis. You have wonderful impediments in the legislation, in the laws. So if we do it for a year and we really enforce all those, I think it can be fine. It has allowed me to keep that cabin. It's allowed me to put a new roof on it. It's allowed me to have it painted, to upgrade it, which I would not otherwise be able to do.
Sheila, that's your, that's what you're
Okay.
You don't live in an overlay.
Hello, I'm George McEldowney. I'm currently a happy resident of Cloverleaf. But I just have actually more of a mundane question concerning the delineation. And when we look at the map, there's an area that's like designated for non-primary by, there's an area designated for non-primary by right. Now there's another area designated apparently in yellow. Is that not for non-primary by condition? Yes, sir. Thank you.
Don't just remember when you talk, please hold the microphone up. So everybody can hear you, okay?
I'm Corey Andrew. I live on Sherwood Drive. My neighbor's there. I don't live in a Jack Bailey house. I think Mickey Mouse might have built parts of it, but we're working on it. I've lived in Auburn for 6 years on Sherwood Drive, and since we moved in, we've had about 3 Airbnbs, investor-owned, or 2 have been investor-owned. One is sort of stayed within the family. And I don't complain. There's no complaints about noise or anything like that, but I took the time to map out all the Airbnbs within a mile radius of my house. And so I put a dot on every house, and then I punched a little hole in the map. And that's kind of how I feel about the investor-owned Airbnbs that have come into my neighborhood. It's just like carving out my neighborhood a little bit. And, those aren't people that I'm going to run into at Kroger on a Tuesday night. They're not people I'm going to see at the polls. They're not people where, my kids can't trick-or-treat at their house. But I use Airbnbs when I go on vacation. I just think that there needs to, I really appreciate you taking the public input for it. And they're coming, and we have to do something about them. I think it's crazy to think that we can keep Airbnbs out of Auburn. And I'm kind of trailing on that. But my second point is that I saw an article that Airbnb advertised that over graduation weekend, Auburn brought in $100,000 in fees for Airbnbs. And I wish there was more discussion about how much of that, what the taxes are like, what the city's going to do with those taxes, And if those could go to like enforcement officers, or if they could go to improvements in areas, but I think there just hasn't been enough discussion about the revenue that's coming in from all of these places, and enforcement is also a big issue.
My name is William Walbrook. I live on Racksville Road out near Sherwood Mall. Supposed to talk to these people though, not these people. From listening to the banner back and forth today, I'd like to ask everybody here a question. Are you upset with the Airbnb, VRBO that people live in and rent them out, or the ones that are being purchased for that purpose?
Ask for a show of hands.
For a show of hands, the ones that, that are not owner occupied, is that what you're upset with? Thank you.
Who's next? Just make sure. Is there anybody else that hasn't spoken that would like to? Okay. I'll come back to you, okay?
I'll stand over here where you can all see me. My name is Ray Huff. I live at 1438 Varner Avenue. It is not a Bailey home, it's a Kirchler home. I've lived there for 27 years. I've been in Auburn since 1974. So like many of you here, I've seen a lot of changes. The reason, in my opinion, for this task force is because there has been a problem with Airbnbs, and that's why this task force was created. If they were trying to get a handle and control and do what is best for Auburn. I don't think there's any malice with any people on this task force, or I don't think this task force has an agenda. I'd like to speak to the survey. I know the gentleman very well who did this survey. And wait just a minute. I know him very well, and his intentions were excellent. And all he wants to do is gather input. So I don't think there's any need to attack that. Yes, would I count some questions or ask some questions? Simply yes. But he's doing a genuine effort to try to get your opinions. So there's nothing wrong with his character, and I take issue with those that think that there is. Short-term rentals. I own Auburn Realty, so yes, I'm a realtor, so y'all can all get mad about that. But I'm on most of your sides. I do a lot of talk with people nationally, and Airbnb short-term rentals is a national discussion. It's just not limited to Auburn. I was talking to somebody today from California, and San Francisco has the same problem we do. They've been through the same thing. My view on it is neighborhood conservation districts need to be protected, no question. I think if somebody has a garage apartment or a room they want to rent out, whether it's short-term or long-term, they should be allowed to. I think short-term rentals the city needs to get a handle on, because they're not paying the taxes that hotels are paying, and they're created, and that's what I think the city's trying to do, is get a handle on how to deal with these people. These people that are doing it, I don't think they're ever in balance. And that's all I'll say for now.
I live on Felton Lane. Live on Felton Lane. It's a C neighborhood. I didn't raise my hand a few minutes ago because your situation does not apply to me. I live next door to a young couple with 2 children, and they rent their house more than they are there. The last 4 weeks, there have been 4 sets of strangers there. I never know who I'm going to see next door. And everybody I've talked to in the city indicates, well, there's nothing really we can do right now. So I'm concerned that we need to get some rules in place, and the more conservative, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
I probably have a voice that can be heard well enough. That's what everyone tells me. Carolyn Carr, I live on Payne Street. I'm the president of the Neighborhood Association, the group that covers Payne Street, Pinedale, and Hare Avenue. And just quickly to go through a couple of things, people talking about, this fear-mongering line, I hate to say this, but this is not fear-mongering. Until you have had the world's most profane Frisbee game in the backyard next to you, you can't appreciate it. When you are awakened at 1 o'clock in the morning by excruciating screams and you think someone is being assaulted, and I actually ran toward the front door to look and see what was happening until I realized it was a party behind the house next door. Oh, sorry. Like I say, I'm used to people. It's only the end of the day. There have been a lot of problems like that going on over the last few years. The noise issue is also the parking question, and people parking on the front lawn when they had already taken up all the parking on Payne Street, all the parking in the driveway, then parking across the front lawn. Not something that your neighbors do, let's face it. There are other things I could say about that, but I really wanted to talk about the fact that I don't think this one-size-fits-all thing works anyway. On Payne Street, we have old, narrow lots. My neighbor on one side, literally, wall to wall, we are 29 feet from each other. And on the other side, 38. Believe me, when there's noise in somebody's backyard, you know about it. And this is, it's a real problem in that type of situation. I also just wanted to comment about, someone asked the question about abutting property. When I was in graduate school, I worked for the city of Tucson. All of their zoning laws said that you had to notify the zoning, things like that applied to anyone within 50 feet of the property line. And I think that that's something that needs to be understood, that noise travels, and it's not just next door or right across the street. I could say a lot more, but I just have to say, I don't see this as neighborhood conservation and the way that this is being approached. This is like we're going to have two separate sets of rules, neighborhood conservation and neighborhood conservation light. And I really think that.
My name is Bob Lowry. I live on Payne Street with my wife Angela for the past 28 years. We have been really surprised at how the value of our house has improved over that period of time. It's the biggest single asset that we own, and we do not want to see property values decline. And I think this is a possibility with this particular ordinance that you're proposing. The other thing, our street is a very quiet neighborhood. It's a narrow, one-way street. It is not a street that you want to put commerce on. And we're the closest street to Auburn University. We're in walking distance of Jordan Hare Stadium. There is a game day house next door to me. There's one across the street. There may possibly be one. We just don't like to see the direction this is going.
Hello, my name is Scott Terrell. I'm at 644 Harbor Avenue, a Bailey house as well. Check. But I've been living in that house since 2013. I bought it when it was really quite run down. It wasn't really an investment property for me. I am in architecture, so I do have an idea of what I can do to cosmetically bring up the property value of my house. I think a lot of people have a stigma of short-term rentals in comparison to certain rental properties in the Auburn area, how they do dilapidate. Now, with the investments that I made in my property, I've more or less doubled, and with the new developments coming in town, yes, it's increased the property value, and I was in an area where the city wanted to rezone for municipality, or not municipality, a business residential development, right where my house is. So the problem that I have with the short-term rentals are in the neighborhood conservation, if you live there, it's your right to rent your property if you occupy that property. If you don't, you probably shouldn't have it. Anywhere else, there is, anywhere else that's zoned for it, sure. If people in that neighborhood conservation have short-term rentals that own those properties that are concerned with noise ordinances outside of those timeframes, call the police. The city's here to protect that. Zoning ordinances are in place to protect the public welfare of those areas. If the city doesn't enforce that, vote your councilman out, find somebody else who will do it, because that's what's happened. The second fact about, or the second matter, fact of the matter is, to me, it's not even so much about the short-term rentals properties, because people that own short-term rentals would have a higher tendency to take care of their current property that they actually rent. My problem is more or less the long-term rental properties, where property management groups sit on those properties, allow them to dilapidate, invest zero money into it, and don't hold the residents accountable to upkeep those properties. Thanks, sir. Thank you.
Is there anybody that hasn't talked yet that would like to talk?
I'm Martha Evans. We've been in Auburn since 1955, and our house since 1975. And the best I can do is to give you a personal experience. Next door to us is a house that's owned by an elected official. He broke laws by renting this house short term, and the people have absolutely just destroyed the neighborhood. At one time, they put locks on each bedroom door, rented to a construction company. There were vans parked in the car, trucks. It was really hard on all of us. We would like to protect our neighborhood. It is a restricted street, and he had to stop this.
Anybody else that hasn't spoken?
My name is James Blackwell, and I live on South Gay Street, which my realtor friends, and I have lots of them tell me, is the garden district. It's a museum district. Anyway, I want to reiterate what people said about Mr. Cotton. I know him. I know Mr. Cotton professionally, and I have great faith in what he says and does. We all know the power in Auburn rests with the city council. And that's a good thing. We need to have one. And I think people should remember today, when they go home, to keep notes of who votes what way on this issue. If you want this to change to happen, vote for it. If you want it against it, vote against it. But don't be afraid to vote somebody out of office if you disagree with them, and don't be afraid to support them if you don't. That's the bottom line of why we're all here. Nobody will change anybody else's view.
Anyone else?
I guess I still don't understand. It's owner occupied, the owner's there when they're renting it out? Can someone answer that?
I can answer that.
And then I want to know what's allowed in my neighborhood and what's not. I still haven't got an answer to that. It's neighborhood conservation, only 2 unrelated people can be there.
Thank you. I saw you earlier on, kind of going, quite hit the sweet spot. So, yeah, so this is not an either-or situation. There is a nuanced argument. There is room for short-term rentals in this city. It's just where they are appropriate and where they're not is one of the layers on this argument. But to speak directly to the classifications that you're talking about, there are 3 types, and correct me if I'm wrong, Barshid. Sure. There are 3 types of housing situations here. There is one which is called a homestay. Well, and the homestay itself is divided into 2, because a homestay could be a home that you live in and you own, and you rent a portion of it out, and you stay there while people rent a room or a piece of your property, a basement or whatever. And then there's a homestay that you vacate for a number of days, and a rentee moves in for 3 or 4 days or what have you. I think the most contentious issue that we are talking about tonight is the 3rd classification, which is non-primary short-term rental. non-primary residential short-term rental, which essentially means somebody's bought a piece of property as an asset. They don't live in that property, but the business model that they use is to rent it not long-term like an annual lease, but a short amount of time, which we're still tossing out numbers in our attempt to regulate it. So those are the three, and I appreciate your passion in this debate and this discussion, but it's not just a black or white thing. There are wrinkles in there, so I caution everybody to not just demonize the business model, but be cognizant of where it's going to take place. If that's...
No, I think that's a good, accurate description.
Did that help you?
No.
It's a simple question. That is, right now, under current zoning laws, what type of Airbnb situation is allowed? Right? Under the current zoning law.
The answer is none.
That's all I
That's it, no, zero. So if it's neighborhood conservation, can more than two unrelated people rent it as a homestead? But I have to abide by the rules 365 days a year, that my family's my family. I can't rent to 3 students and live in my house. I don't see the difference.
You while we're here tonight. All right.
Okay, my name is Julie Leon, and I have a short-term rental in Auburn, and I am in one of the areas that allows for 5 unrelated. Okay, I have a business license, I'm a non-primary short-term rental. My neighbors on either side are college kids, there's a vacant lot behind me, and behind that are the ADUs that everybody loves so much. It's an area where I've never had a complaint. I'm very particular about who I rent to. I don't let them auto book, they have to message me and tell me why they're coming anything. That said, I went to planning a couple of weeks ago because I had the same question. Because my house has always been zoned for 5 unrelated. But I fall into the overlay district where I have to now have my neighbor's permission. And I don't have the ability to continue doing what I've been doing without my neighbor's permission, which that's a bunch of college kids. So I'm like, okay, this is kind of tricky. And I'm not in an NC zone, I'm in an NRD. I am 7 blocks from the stadium. So, the way it was explained to me, as far as the 2 versus the 5, is that was kind of a guideline that they kind of sort of applied because they had nothing, which is what everybody's coming down to, which is how all of these houses started getting put all over town doing what they're doing. The zoning ordinances where you're an NC or an RDD or an NRD or whatever letter suit you are, is different completely than the 2 occupants unrelated versus the 5 unrelated when it comes down to what Forrest does. Is that not correct, Forrest? The zoning, you can have one person that's RDD in one neighborhood that is allowed 5 unrelated, and you can also have an RDD somewhere else in town that only allows 2 unrelated.
Are you talking about currently?
Yes.
No, that's not correct.
That's not correct? Because that was why, because I asked, why am I in a situation where I'm allowed 5 unrelated, but now I'm falling into conditional use, and I was told that it's because they have some of the same zoning in different areas, where some of it is like in Northwest Auburn, where they're only allowed 2
Well, now,
unrelated.
there is a
2 minutes.
There is a very recent adjustment that actually, when we did the Northwest Auburn plan, there was a lot of concern about proliferation of student housing in Northwest Auburn. So there was a special regulatory adjustment made for NRD and RDD as it related to essentially student housing, to preclude student housing could potentially be allowed in NRD east of North Donahue, but not west of North Donahue. And the same applied to RDD. That was a specific outcome of that particular plan effort, separate and apart from anything that we're talking about tonight related to short-term rentals.
Okay, so I'm in like.
That was a student housing driven issue, not a short-term rental issue.
Okay. Well, still not completely clear on that then myself, because that doesn't match with what I finally thought I understood when I was called planning.
Okay, well, I'll be glad to,
Yeah,
I'll be glad to
I'll
talk to
go
you.
back
I'll be glad to talk to you.
I'm Gwen Reed. I live on South Gay Street. I've lived in Auburn for 40 years. I've lived in this neighborhood overlay for those 40 years. And I am strongly, strongly in favor of our neighborhood conservation. We worked hard to get a conservation, a conservancy designation in our area. The one thing I want to know, we've all expressed our views, is what happens next? Ron?
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Gwen.
Yeah.
So the task force will get together soon. We have not set a date. I would imagine that'd be in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And we'll take all this information that we've received. As I said at the beginning, we've had 2 public hearings. We've had 60 days of commentary. We've got many of us have received our own communication. And we'll start trying to put together some ideas and debating those ideas. And will ultimately be handed off to the planning commission. The task force is not a voting body per se, okay? I guess the best way to describe us is we're advising. We're creating ideas and passing along information. Planning, the way our government works, is planning, and the planning commission will take this. They'll put together an ordinance that they will debate and discuss. And then depending on how that goes, it'll come to the city council, and the city council will have the final authority. So this will not be a fast process. All of this has to be legally advertised. You have to be made well aware that we're having these votes and discussions. When our task force meets, that has to be publicly advertised. So there'll be lots of opportunity for you to be involved as far as listening, and there'll at least be 2 more opportunities for you to be involved as far as voicing your opinion. But you can always do that through email or phone call to any of us on any day you want to. Okay? Does that answer your question, Will? All right, who is not? I'm sorry. I'm coming back to you next.
Can y'all see this? Y'all see what this is?
Great, put her out.
It's an orange and a grape. Are these interchangeable? Are they interchangeable? No. The survey that was.
Keep your props on the microphone.
You're no props. The survey to which many people responded online, and I'm sure Mr. Smith did have the best of intentions. But when you lump all short-term rentals with a preface that says that they are interchangeable when they very clearly are not, the survey does not gather valid data. I'm sure people may have thought they were answering questions about owner-occupied short-term rentals, which don't bother me particularly. And so, yeah, man, I'm supporting of these, but I sure don't want a non-owner-occupied an investor-owner house next door. And I respectfully request that this survey come down because it has not gathered valid data. I would love to see a continued city-sponsored survey that everybody on this task force contributes to and says, hey, how about this question? And that someone that has, I don't have statistical knowledge, but you want a certain response. You can pose your question in a certain way and get that response. I think we need someone that knows about that stuff and have it vetted by this task force. I respect every one of these people up here, and I think they want to do a good job. Let's do it right, please, and don't have somebody just flying out a survey that says you have 2 interchangeable things that are not. Thank you.
Hi, this is Beth again on Virginia Avenue. This is specifically related to investor-owned, non-occupied short-term rentals. And as I read it, it says that those people could rent that for 240 days out of the year. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so when I read that, I'm not sure about y'all, that's not particularly short-term to me. And in fact, if you do the math, that is 2 semesters. So if I'm doing this correctly in my head, you could potentially rent an investor-owned short-term rental to more than 2 unrelated people and have them there for up to 240 days. So my question to the task force, and thank you for your service, is how are you going to make that match up with the current residency requirement of no more than 2 unrelated people? I see 2 very big issues here. And the last thing I would like to say is, again, I've lived here for 25 years. The first decade, the city of Auburn would not provide support for rentals that were not in line with that, and now they are. I really thank the city for coming to help us when we have houses that are in violation of the 2 unrelated. But again, my question is, we've got this 240-day investor-owned short-term rental. How are you going to make that match up? I see an issue here.
Hey, Susan Holt again, just to address some issues. I don't know if everybody has experience with Airbnb, but my daughter, when she was in clinicals in her schooling, she needed short-term rentals, 6, 8, 10 weeks. You can't find that except, we were not able to find that except for through Airbnb, VRBO, so we were very thankful to find people who would open up their home. My other thing is I would ask for everybody to please look at it. What I'm hearing are a lot of problems, and I agree with the problems that y'all are talking about, because I don't want somebody littering up my neighborhood or being loud and disturbing me. I want to challenge the task force for us to address problems and not do a blanket that penalizes people who are really trying to provide a service and trying to do something beneficial to the community, because I feel like that's what we try to do. We're trying to do something good. We're not trying to hurt our neighbors. And I really feel for some of the stories that y'all have told, because I would be pretty darn mad myself. I'm not one of those hosts. So I would like for y'all please to take that into account.
I appreciate Mr. Huff's acknowledgement that my comments about the ethics, I was not addressing them to the individual. I was talking about the ethic of the survey itself. As a researcher, and those of us in the audience who are researchers, the construction of a survey has significant ethical implications. And that was what I was calling into question, not the individual per se. And I wanted to say I really appreciated Linda's continuing explanation or differentiation of the importance of a qualified, well-constructed, objective survey, because the survey as it is being used to make assumptions about public support, pro or con, and you cannot make a valid decision. And this is the sense that it might be a decision foundation for anyone who may be making a decision for us on these issues concerns me, because those aren't valid data in which to base qualified, well-informed decisions. So I apologize if there was an interpretation that I was calling into question the individual's ethics and not the process of the survey itself.
Ruth Brock. I live on Kinley Avenue, the library side. Virginia, not everybody has had survey methods. So I'm just going to throw that out there. I think we can all agree Airbnb, VRBO is not inherently bad. We have some examples in here tonight of families that are using them, and that's fantastic for those. I also have 2 small children. You know, I worry about traffic coming down from the library, but I just think we need to have some regulations around it. You know, not a free-for-all. Just protect what we have. I think a consensus, a middle ground can be reached on this.
Louise Katainen again. With regard, the mayor has mentioned that the deliberation should be efficient, not overly speedy. I'm wondering what the timeline is and whether or not a decision is geared toward this year's coming football season, and whether the decision will be made in the summertime when many people are absent and will not be able readily to submit opinions and so forth. Perhaps the mayor can address that question.
You'll have plenty of time to tell us how you feel about this. And we have intentionally tried to be as open and transparent and involving. I would think people that have been within the city of Auburn would tell you that this is probably an extraordinary type of effort that we put together here. So we have no intention of doing this while everybody's on vacation July the 4th. At the same time, we want to be efficient and we want to be respectful of everyone, and we don't want to waste a lot of time. But there are advertising requirements. We have to advertise our meetings. There has to be a certain amount of time on that. Planning Commission only meets monthly as a commission to vet and vote on things. So everybody will be well aware of this. I don't know where this falls in as far as this football season. We're in Memorial Day. We started around the first of the year. At this point in time, I can't make any promises to you on that.
Can Forrest answer Beth's question about the 5 unrelated? Maybe Beth can say the question.
Might need to restate that question.
What?
Your thing, he didn't answer your 5 unrelated. Can you state that question again? I just want to hear what Forrest said.
Absolutely can, I just want him to think about it.
Okay, thank you. All right, is anybody else?
I feel like I'm getting let down, not going twice. But I think to Beth's question, and I'm kind of a neighbor of Beth's and used to live very close to her, a little bit further down the street. I think the 240 days is being misinterpreted as that's not short-term, that's not a short-term rental. It's not 240 consecutive days of rental, it's 240 days of short-term rental activity, which, I do think it's something they need to address, but a short-term rental, I think, in people's minds is, 2 or 3 or 4 days, a week or something like that, but the activity engaging in those stays can happen for 240 days if I'm staying my direction.
Under the current proposal, the rental activity could be no more than 30 consecutive days. That is by definition of what a short-term
No more
non-rental.
than 30 days, short-term, consecutive, yeah.
I'm Lee Albrook. At your last meeting, I think there was, I don't have my ordinance with me, but was there not a 3 complaint rule or something about taking the business license away if you had 3 complaints?
Yes.
Okay. You might tell them what that is.
Yeah, typically, at least the complaints I'm most aware of that relate to the activity that currently goes on, and quite frankly, also with unrelated occupancy enforcement, is noise. And so the thinking there was that noise is, if we don't have a noise ordinance, we do have a nuisance ordinance. If there's noise and it's reported to the police, they come out, and I've been involved with several enforcement cases where the officer uses his or her independent judgment on if the number one is the noise unreasonable. If he does feel the noise is unreasonable, or she feels the noise is unreasonable, they'll essentially tell them to turn it down or turn it off. If they get a second complaint and they return, it's a citation. And that would largely be what we would rely on and consider a substantiated complaint.
ownership reasons, but also because I would like to operate a occupied Airbnb space. We have made improvements to our home for that purpose. I have done a lot of investigation about what it entails to be a responsible Airbnb operator, and I know that I'm following most dictates where you would be very carefully screening your guests for your own personal safety as well as your neighbors. You are on premise to manage that property and manage the guest activity and their behaviors. And you're also investing in your property so that you can uphold your reputation online, in the marketplace, as well as with your neighbors to uphold those property values. So I would encourage you to maybe be less restrictive for those properties who have a better or more investment in that neighborhood versus a short-term rental where there is opportunity to put in some more regulation for that as well. But also to give representation from that contingency on your task force going forward.
Hi, this is Ely Sherwin again. I live on Hare. As far as the noise is an issue, and it already has driven one of our neighbors out of the neighborhood because they couldn't get the enforcement that they needed to raise teenagers, just catty corner to us. But it's not just that, it's the parking on our little streets, on yellow zones, it's the trash, it's the just general disrespect for our little neighborhoods. And so for our conservation neighborhoods, and raising two little boys there who are gonna wanna drive their bicycles and scooters up and down the street, this is a serious impact to our lifestyle and our livelihoods.
Question for Mr. Cotton.
She lives on Hare.
Who's next?
I have a question for Mr. Cotton. Mr. Cotton said it takes a second complaint for the noise to be, quote, substantiated. How many citations have actually been issued by the city since you were defining it?
Well, number one, when I responded, I meant that to be an example, not the only way in which a complaint can be substantiated.
Mayor, do you have an answer?
I don't have an answer.
Who does? Who in the city would have that answer that the lady had raised? A substantiated noise complaint. How many actual citations has the city issued in the past year?
We can check on that tomorrow, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, please put that in the city's open line. So that,
I don't know if we're putting it open line, but we'll get you an answer. How about that?
okay, well, you can.
Okay, I'll get you a letter.
Okay. Thank you,
I'll speak to that.
Thank you. I've had 43 years in local, county, and federal law enforcement, so I'd like to address possible mechanisms, enforcement mechanisms here that really haven't been discussed. I think, I read an article, I think I sent it to Bob, I believe it's New Orleans has this issue. I believe that they said that if you have more than 3 violations in a year, you get your license, assuming that everything is ironed out and everybody is in love with everything, that you have your license, you cannot be renewed for 3 years. We need to put some teeth in it. And how about some fines? Maybe, in other words, one warning or two, and then you get a $500 fine, and then, and maybe, or a $1,000 fine. This is, if it's not an enforcement mechanism, and real quick, Auburn makes enough money, let's get this enforced once it's passed. Let's all tell the mayor and everybody on the council, we want 8 or 10 code enforcement officers, pay their salaries, let them understand the city, the zones, and get acquainted with all of the nuances with what the final product is. Because right now, you're gonna have police officers that are gonna, because I was an Alderman cop for 8 years.
during these football games, you're gonna have 85 to 100,000 people in this town, all want to have a good time, and that's all great and fun and dandy, and we all agree to that. What's gonna happen is people come in for the short-term rentals Thursday through Sunday, assuming that all is well and we get a good, everybody's happy with the final product. You're not gonna be able to get, or we absolutely should not expect our police officers to be coming out here and looking at these nuisances and the noise complaints and so forth. This is very important, so please give me 3 more seconds. So if you have additional code enforcement people, that's their job and they're expert, send them to training and so forth. Let them go out on a Saturday night after a 85,000 fan ball game. Let them come out and take pictures or have contact with the reporting next door neighbors. Not one of our police officers. And also entertain pleas of having a recorded line, and this is not my idea, a recorded line designated at the dispatch strictly for the code people to get these complaints. Because what's going to happen is, if people come in on Thursday, they're gone on Sunday. So how do you come out here and contact these people and say, no, we're not putting up with this? And then the people who are renting to these folks, how do you get these people drawn back?
30 seconds.
Yes, how do you get them drawn back to find out who they are and that kind of thing? So thank you.
And that was working on the compliance and enforcement businesses that offer those services.
Last one.
Connor Bailey, Brookside. I appreciate the efforts here by the task force and Bob trying to make clarity about the question of homestay, which really should mean home stay rather than be divided into two things, which even such a person as yourself with such clarity had a hard time explaining. Homestay is homestay, right? I think we can just change the wording here and make it very clear that an owner-occupied person, a room can be let out, a portion of the home can be let out while the owner is still staying. That's one thing that would make things a little clearer and simpler, just some of the wording. The second point, and I raised it earlier about the question of complaints, substantiated complaints, which has come up here just recently, which is why I decided to speak again. That needs to be fleshed out, because right now, it puts too much pressure on Forest Cotton. We don't know what, and I still at this point don't know what represents a substantiated complaint. That needs to be spelled out clearly so the citizens understand. Thank you.
I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I'm really, as my father-in-law said, part of my job is seeking the truth as an attorney, and part of this process I've been part of, and now I feel like, and I apologize about walking on the stage, but the main thing is I didn't want to be part of the story. You guys are the story here. I'm not. I'm trying to get data and information. I promise you there was no ill will or intent on what I was producing. I just wanted data. Nevertheless, I'm very proud of the process that we've gone through. I'm proud of the engagement from online to emails to phone calls to text messages to everybody being here to talk about it. So it's a very sensitive issue. It's got economic elements to it, but it also has protect my castle elements, because these are our homes. And so that is a big issue to me, and that's why I want to make sure, as the mayor has said, that we do not do anything that's hasty, that we get the feel and we do it right. And so I appreciate everyone being here this evening. As always, I've got my business card up here. If you want to take my number, it's got my cell phone number on it, it's got an email. If you want to call and tell me I'm a knucklehead, I'll be happy to listen to be told. My wife tells me that all the time, so it's not putting anything unusual. But I'm very thankful for everyone, thankful for everyone coming out. I'm glad to see this process continue. So.
Those of you who know me know that I'm not here to give you theatre. I'm here to legislate something decent, something real, something with substance, and not playing any games here at all. It's a serious issue, and I'm serious about it, and I've heard your complaints, and I'm not going to do a song and dance and kick it down the road. We're going to get something with substance here. I appreciate your input.
And I just want to say thank you to the task force. Our work is really about to begin. As y'all can see, this is a very interesting issue. There's a lot to it. It's going to be our effort to try to give the best ordinance that we can that's in the best interest of Auburn. There's not one now. And so it's our desire to bring one forward that's good for Auburn. I want to say one thing about this survey. Brett told me he was going to do a survey. I said, Brett, go forward and do good information. I ultimately, as the mayor, could have stopped the survey. I could have approved the survey. I didn't do any of that. I let Brett go forward. It's good information, but it's part of the information, okay? We've heard the best information is what's happened tonight. And the best information is what you sent to us on the online comments. So,
Will you commit to a professionally constructed
well,
survey?
I'll commit to you that we'll have a conversation about it. How about that? Is that a good commitment?
It's a start.
Yeah, okay. So we'll be getting together soon. It's Memorial Day this weekend. I don't know if we still got some more seats for the Mayor's Memorial Day breakfast, but if you're available on Monday morning and want to come to something that's meaningful, I encourage you to do that. And I ask all of you, this has been a very difficult week in this town. For the first time in our city's history, we have lost a police officer. And I just ask that you just be mindful of that as you go through your weekend. Thank all of you. If you want to chat before you leave today, we're all up here to talk to you, okay? Y'all have a good night.